Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we will be going over everything you need to know in order to care for a corn snake. In addition, this video will inform you about everything that you will need in order to create a perfect environment for your pet corn snake to thrive in. So without further ado, let's get into it. So to begin with, let's actually talk a bit about corn snakes. Corn snakes are a crepuscular species, which means that they are primarily active during dusk and dawn. In the wild, corn snakes will hunt down prey items such as mice, rats, frogs, little fish, and small birds. Once they get hold of their prey, what they tend to do is they'll constrict that prey and then squeeze it until it's completely dead, and then they can actually eat it. When I say constrict, what I actually mean is they'll strike at their prey and then they'll wrap themselves right around that prey item and then they'll squeeze it. Corn snakes are typically quite an active species of snake, which means that they spend a lot of time actually out in the open, which makes them a great option for those looking for a pet snake because they're actually going to be out and about quite a lot. In addition to this, they are a great option for those who have never kept pet reptiles before because they are quite easy and straightforward to care for, they're cheap to maintain, they're very good eaters, and all round fairly docile. In the wild, corn snakes will typically only live for around 10 to 15 years, and in captivity, their lifespan will range between 15 to 30 years. Adult corn snakes can range in size between 3 to 6 foot, depending on male or female. They typically are quite a slim looking snake, as opposed to like quite a chunky snake. Something like a boa or a python is a lot chunkier than a corn snake would be. And baby corn snakes are typically born at around 10 to 15 inches long. Corn snakes are also a great option for those looking for some hands-on experience. Because they're quite a curious species and very active, they do love a good handling session. So now let's move on and dive straight into their care requirements. So to start with, let's go over their temperature and humidity requirements. So to begin with, what you're going to want to do is you're going to have your heating positioned to one side of the vivarium. This is going to create your hot side, and then the opposite side to your heating is going to be your cold side. But we'll touch more on this later on. Basically, what you're going to do is on your hot side, where your heating is, you're going to want to try to achieve a temperature range of between 28 to 30 degrees Celsius, which is 82 to 86 Fahrenheit. And then on your cold side, which is the opposite side of the enclosure, what you want to do is create a temperature range on that end between 20 degrees Celsius to 24 degrees Celsius, which is 68 to 75 Fahrenheit. This temperature range will provide your corn snake with areas within the enclosure where it can either sit and bask or it can go and cool down. Now for their humidity, corn snakes don't need much of it. However, their enclosure should sit between 40 to 60% humidity. I do find that if you use an appropriate substrate with the correct heating system, the enclosure should naturally sit within this range anyway. However, if the humidity levels did drop below 40%, all I recommend you doing is just giving it a gentle misting just to boost that humidity level back up. Now, I will also mention that when I notice my corn snakes are going into shed, I will tend to spray down their enclosure a bit more regularly and keep that humidity level higher than it usually is. Now, the reason why I do this is because obviously if they're going into shed, they're going to remove their skin, and basically having the higher humidity, it just helps remove that skin a lot easier, and it also helps the skin come off in one piece rather than lots of little tiny little pieces. Now, if you notice that your corn snake is shedding in lots of little pieces, this is usually an indicator that the enclosure isn't providing enough humidity, and it could just be down to the fact you might be using a too dry of a substrate, which is in turn resulting in a lack of humidity. So now you should have a pretty good idea of what temperatures and humidity you are going to try to achieve with inside the enclosure. So now let's move on to the actual enclosure sizing. So first of all, for a baby or juvenile corn snake, I'd recommend a 2 foot by 1.3 foot terrarium, which looks just like the one on the screen. The main reason why I'd recommend using this type of enclosure over a glass front enclosure like this one is because baby corn snakes are extremely good escape artists. Years ago, I kind of lost a few expensive corn snakes, all because they managed to escape from the gap between the glass, which is why I'd recommend a top opening enclosure for a baby or juvenile. I wouldn't want you to make the same mistake I made back then. You can actually buy this Habitat hatchling starter kit, which comes with everything you will need for a baby corn snake. It also comes with the enclosure I'm talking about. Now, once they've grown bigger than a juvenile, you will notice that they would have outgrown their current enclosure. So at this point, I would recommend you go straight for upsizing the enclosure to an adult size enclosure. So for a adult corn snake, I'd recommend a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot as a minimum sized enclosure. Obviously, if you can and want to go bigger, that's great, go for it. But the minimum I'd recommend is a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. Like I say, once they outgrow the baby hatchling enclosure, they will be at a size where they won't be able to escape through the gap between the glass. So when you do make the switch to the 4x2x2, this won't be a problem for you at all. So now that we have discussed about their enclosure sizing, let's now move on to talk about their heating and lighting systems for each size enclosure, which I recommended. So for heating up the baby or juvenile enclosure, which we spoke about, I would recommend you getting a heat mat like this one and a mat stat to control the temperature of this heat mat. Now, again, obviously, if you've bought the hatchling starter kit, both these products do actually come within that starter kit. Now, for the lighting for the baby/juvenile enclosure, I'd recommend getting one of these small LED bars, which is one of our own branded products. Now, the starter kit doesn't actually come with a light, but I recommend you getting our LED light to install in the enclosure to provide your snake with a day and night cycle. This way, obviously, they'll be able to determine day and night, but it's also perfect size for the enclosure, as well as very easy to install. Now, moving on to the 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot vivarium heating and lighting system, it's going to be very different to what I've just advised for the baby or juvenile enclosure. Now, this is primarily because, first of all, you're heating up a much larger enclosure, so it's going to have a completely different heating system. And also, the lighting available for this size enclosure is so much more beneficial to the health of your snake. So obviously, the lighting is going to be slightly different. So for the heating, the first thing that you're going to need for your 4 foot enclosure is a ceramic heat lamp holder. These usually look like something like this. Obviously, these are 2 options. There's a few more on the market. Just make sure that it's a ceramic one and not a plastic one, because I've had plastic ones melt in the past, which could become a fire hazard. Second of all, obviously, you're going to want to get a lamp guard. There's a few different options on the market. These are just a few examples. It's important to get a guard though for the enclosure, purely because corn snakes will tend to climb quite a bit. So obviously, if they're climbing around and they're climbing up towards the heat lamp, there's a good chance that they're going to try and wrap themselves around the bulb and they could burn themselves. So obviously, by having one of these, you're going to stop the snake actually getting to that bulb, and there's going to be somewhat of a barrier between them. For the basking bulb itself, there are a few options you can go for. So the first option would be the incandescent spot lamp bulbs from 50 watts to 100 watts. Personally, in the 4x2 enclosures, if you're using this style bulb, I do find the 75 to 100 watts work the best. But make sure that you plug it into a dimming thermostat to control and regulate that temperature. Now, your second option is the halogen bulbs, which look like this. Again, other brands on the market. Personally, I find if you do go for this option, go for the 75 watt. I find they tend to work the best within the 4x2 enclosures. Again, you're going to want to make sure that you plug it into a dimming thermostat in order to control and regulate that temperature. Here's an example of what a dimming thermostat would look like. Again, you would just run it into the enclosure, put the probe underneath the basking spot, and this is going to sense the temperature that you set on the device, and then it will regulate that temperature accordingly. Now, for both style bulbs, which I've just recommended to you, both offer what's called UVA. Now, UVA is slightly different to UVB, but we'll touch on UVB in a minute. But UVA is basically part of the sun's natural light spectrum. It will promote natural behaviors. It will also help with your snake's immune system. Now, I mainly bring this up because I get a lot of people come in and they tell me that they're using one of these, the ceramic heater emitters, as their main source of heating. Now, personally, I would only recommend using one of these as a nighttime source of heating. For example, in the UK, our temperatures in the winter months, they drop quite low. So obviously, if you want to boost those nighttime temperatures to keep it above a minimum temperature, then yeah, this is going to heat up your enclosure for during the night. And it works great for that. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't simulate the sun. So I don't understand why people are using these as their main source of heating for during the daytime basking, especially for a species that loves to be out and about and actually be active within their enclosure. Wouldn't you want to provide a better, more simulating bulb? Like, this is why I'd recommend using the bulbs which I recommended to you, because they provide UVA, which is part of the sun's natural light spectrum. But this doesn't do that. So if you are using one of these, I'd highly recommend that you switch to one of the bulbs that I recommended. Like I said, if you want to use it for during the night, yeah, it works great. But it works like a radiator. It doesn't really do much else, if I'm honest with you. So now we have fully covered the heating. You have a better understanding of what heating system you need for each size enclosure. Let's now move on to the lighting. So the first thing, lighting wise, we're going to talk about is UVB. So this is the 14 watt, 2.5% UVB kit. This is what I'd personally recommend you using. They don't need much UVB, but obviously I would highly recommend you installing UVB because corn snakes, again, are very active. They do spend a lot of time out in the open. So obviously if you've installed UVB, your snake is going to reap the benefits of the UVB. It has so many health benefits for them, which is why I highly recommend that you install one. Now, on top of that, if you have gone bioactive, which is where you plant live plants in your enclosure, you're going to need to get yourself a Jungle Dawn LED bar. This is the 34 watt one. You can also get the slightly longer one, which will fit in the enclosure too. It's the 51 watt Jungle Dawn as well. But yeah, like I say, this will promote plant growth for your live plants. But even if you're not going bioactive and you've gone for, like, let's say a fake setup with fake plants, I'd still highly recommend installing one of these because it does provide a great light spectrum and it does really seriously brighten that enclosure up. So yeah, that's why I would highly recommend you also install a Jungle Dawn. So that's basically everything you need to know regarding lighting for this size enclosure. Now, there is one other thing that I actually forgot to speak about when we were discussing the heating, and that is you're going to want a way of testing your temperature. So personally, I use this Exoterra infrared thermometer. I like using this because I can test the temperature everywhere within inside the enclosure and not just one specific spot. That being said though, there are other options. You can use this analog thermometer. This just sticks onto the side of the enclosure, but it will only test the temperature where this is stuck. Now, there is another option, which is the digital version, which looks like this. You run the probe in to where you want it to read the temperature, and then the temperature will display itself on the screen. Both of these work, but personally, I use this. I find it so much more better and accurate. Now, there is also one other thing, which is you're going to want a way of testing your humidity inside the enclosure. So there are two options for this. This is the analog version, and then again, you've got the digital version. Both of them work just as well as one another. and that it will tell you what the humidity is with inside that enclosure. Oh, also, for your LED bar and your UVB light, you are going to probably want to get yourself one of these. Now, these are the LampGuard Pros. These will go over the top of your lighting, and it will stop your snake from getting too close to it and also wrapping itself around the lights or pulling out the tube of the UVB. So now let's move on to discuss substrate. Now, there is a few which I personally wouldn't recommend, but we're going to go through them anyway. But there are a few options which you can use. So the first option is the Aspen, and the second option is the beach chips. Personally, these are the two which I'd highly recommend you don't use. I find a lot of breeders tend to use these because it's quite a cheap substrate, and it is easy to clean. I do get that. But personally, I find it's not a great substrate to use because it doesn't provide much humidity. When you mist it as well, it also like molds a lot quicker. On top of that, I find it's quite a dry substrate. I used to use Aspen, a few years back, and like every single time my snake shed, it would always shed in like loads of pieces. But ever since I switched, stopped. It sheds in one piece. And that's just purely because it's down to a very dry substrate. It's not providing enough humidity for corn snakes. So the second option I would recommend, which is much more better than Aspen or beach chips, is the cocoa husk. Now, this comes as a brick and you mix it with hot water and it will expand right out into a full substrate. Now, this is quite a big brick. You can get smaller bricks, by the way. It's just what I had on the shelf, so I thought I'd use it. But yeah, like I said, holds humidity a hell of a lot better than Aspen and beach chips. It's not as dry of a substrate as well, and it is still inexpensive, and it's also fairly easy to clean. So yeah, if you're looking for a substrate which is cheap to maintain and change, I would highly recommend you go for the cocoa husk because it is quite inexpensive and it is going to provide more humidity for your corn snake than Aspen or beach chips. Now, the next option, I personally have never actually tried. However, I have got a lot of customers using it, and they're using it with no issues. So I'm not going to say I recommend it because I've never actually tried it, but I thought I'd include it in case it was an option that you've been looking into. I've got a lot of customers that are using the orchid bark. Again, I haven't actually tested this out myself for corn snakes, so I can't really give much of an opinion on that one, but I can definitely tell you they will hold more humidity than Aspen and beach chips. So the next option I would also recommend is the Jungle Bio. That's also a great one. It's more of a natural earth sort of mix. Now, there is one other substrate you can use, and that's this. This is the Arcadia Earth Mix. Honestly, this is such a good substrate. I use it for pretty much all of my bioactive enclosures. I have no bad words to say about this, but yeah, you can use this for your corn snakes. Now, you can just use this on its own and just completely fill the entire enclosure with it. Now, personally, I actually do a different bioactive mix for my corn snakes, which does include this. So I use 40% of this substrate, and then I use 30% of the cocoa husk, and then I will add in a handful of sphagnum moss. And then what I will do is I'll mix it all together. And once it's all mixed together, I'll then add 10% of desert sand. Now, what the sand does is basically corn snakes do like to burrow and they will often go underneath the substrate. So having the sand mixed into the biomix will help hold those burrows a lot better for them. Now, to top off the whole mix, as you can see, I will put some leaf litter across the top of the substrate, and this will ultimately create your bioactive mix. And this is perfect food source for like your isopods and springtails. But yeah, that's what I do to add a final little touch to my enclosures. So that's basically everything for the substrate. Like I said, I would personally steer clear from the Aspen and the beach chips. If you want one that's cheap, I'd go for the cocoa husk. But if you want to go for a more natural bioactive mix, I'd highly recommend you go for the full bioactive mix, which we've just gone over. So now let's move on to talk about decoration. So first of all, you can use either fake plants or live plants. Personally, I'd recommend live plants, but obviously fake plants will do perfectly fine. I will be doing a future video where we actually make all of our corn snake vivariums bioactive with live plants. Currently, I'm using fake plants, but that's something you can look out for in the future. It's honestly just down to personal preference, really. Now, you are going to want to make sure that you provide a minimum of 2 to 3 hides. One is going to be on your hot side, one is going to be on your cold side, and your third one is going to be your shedding hide, which usually has sphagnum moss in to help them shed and has a high humidity. Now, you can obviously buy loads of hides. You can also use cork bark tubes. They work great as hides, and they also provide something for your corn snake to climb on. Now, corn snakes do actually love to climb, so I would highly recommend having some like branches and some like fake vines in there, which they can actually climb on. They will make use of it. They do love to move around and be quite active. You basically want to fill the enclosure with lots of things to keep them active and keep them entertained, so they feel safe and feel like they can move themselves to different areas in the enclosure to get different temperatures and also feel safe and secure. I would also highly recommend that you have a water bowl which has fresh water in their enclosure at all times. Corn snakes will drink lots of water to prevent themselves from getting dehydrated. So please make sure that you offer them fresh water every single day. Now, moving on to their captive diet, they will mainly be feeding on frozen mice. Now, you will want to ensure that you get the correct size rodent for your corn snake size. You don't want to feed a prey item which is too big. I will be making a separate video on this topic in the future, but a general rule of thumb is a prey item should be no longer than the snake's widest body girth, so no more than 1.5 times the width of the corn snake's body. Some people will also do it by the corn snake's weight, so you can weigh your corn snake and offer a rodent which is 10% of the snake's body weight. For example, if your snake weighed 80 grams, you would feed a mouse which is 10%, which would mean you would be feeding an 8-gram mouse. Like I say, we will go into more depth on this in a future video. Now, I will also mention that corn snakes are exceptionally great eaters. It's highly unlikely you'll have a problem with them not eating unless they're going into shed. During shedding, they can tend to stop eating and then they'll be straight back on it once they've shedded their skin. Now, I bring this up because a lot of people do tend to overfeed corn snakes, because if you offer them food, they will go for it. So just be mindful not to overfeed. Now, there is also one other thing I'd like to mention. I would highly recommend you remove your corn snake from the enclosure when you feed, and only ever feed it outside of the enclosure. The reason why I say this is because corn snakes can become quite defensive quite quickly, and usually it's when they associate their enclosure with food, or their temperatures and humidities are wrong. I only bring this up because I get so many people coming in saying that their corn snakes are vicious and very defensive of their enclosure. But 9 out of 10 of the times, it is literally because they're feeding it inside the enclosure and it's associating its viv with food. So yeah, like I say, I would just highly recommend you remove the snake whilst you feed. Oh, also, I recommend feeding babies to juveniles once a week, and then sub-adults once a week or once every other week. And once they are fully grown and full adults, then you can feed once every 2 to 3 weeks. So there you go. That is pretty much everything you need to know in order to care for a corn snake. Now, I will also just mention that for the 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot vivariums, there is also this. It's the Habitat Snake Accessory Kit, which is slightly different to the starter kit. Obviously, this doesn't come with the enclosure, but as you can see, it comes with all of your heating equipment, your lighting equipment, and everything but the substrate and the enclosure itself. But yeah, that's basically it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you have learned something from this video. If you did, feel free to drop us a like. I'd really appreciate it. If there's anything I didn't cover in this video that you would like to know more about, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to be able to make videos on them in the future. And I'll make sure to leave links in the description for all of the products which I mentioned in today's video, in case you are looking for them. If you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing. We've got lots of exciting content lined up for the future of the channel. I'm very excited to get filming. But yeah, thanks again so much for watching, and I hope you did learn something, and I shall see you in my next video. See ya!